Hello, my name is John. Welcome to the first video in the series on cutting glass. We're going to start off talking about cutting surfaces. What you want is something that's smooth and firm. If I push on this, see how kind of spongy it gives? That's not acceptable because when you go to score glass and you're pushing down, it's very easy to break your glass because it's not got a firm surface. The PVC tables, they have the folding legs on them. They tend to be kind of spongy unless you're right over top of the leg area. So keep an eye out for that. Most likely you're probably going to have to put a piece of plywood or something on top of it to give you a stiff surface to work with. This is called a Morton grid right here, Morton surface. It has little cells. And what the cells do is they allow the glass shards to fall in there. It helps you on 3 points. One is because the shards are in here, they're not underneath the glass, so when you push down the glass, they aren't creating a high point that can cause the glass to crack while you're scoring the glass. 2, the shards that fall in here, they won't scratch the glass as you move it around, or scratch the coating off a coated glass such as mirror, Van Gogh glass, or silver coat. And 3, your body will not reject glass. It's not an irritant to it, and so if you get a wood splinter, it might fester out on you, get all pussy and red and irritated. The glass will not do that. That doesn't mean it will be comfortable, but you'll have to go back in and you'll have to dig it out to get it out. So do not use your hand to brush your surface clean. Always use a little whisk broom of some sort. Now, this Morton surface came out about 1980. And then about 8 or 9 years later, another company came out with one similar. It's called a waffle grid. It does the exact same purpose. And we'll talk more about these surfaces later in other videos about glass cutting systems. So let's say you get a piece of plywood that's nice and firm, you're going to cut on it, but it's kind of rough and uneven, or not uneven, but it's got little holes and pockets. You can lay a self-healing cutting mat, such as this one used for quilting, sewing, maybe scrapbooks use it, over top to give you a smoother surface. Some people like it because it's got a grid system on it, and it's got some measuring scales. But if you use this, or if you use one of the grid systems, you do not want to solder them because it'll melt into the plastic or the surface here. And that can ruin them. Now this right here is probably not heat resistant, but there are some out there similar to this made with silicone that are heat resistant. So you kind of have to know what you have. Here's just a small little portable board you can use for smaller projects. It's plywood. It's got little wood strips nailed on the side. And what the wood strips do is, one, they help contain your stuff a little bit, but notice it's a square corner. So if you're making a square or a rectangular project, you can use this to help keep your lines nice and even and smooth. So this surface here works good for cutting glass on. It's firm. It works good. Another thing you can do with these type of things is you can set your pattern under it, on it. This is a piece of plate glass. It's 1/4 inch, pretty thick. And I put that over top of my pattern. Then I take my glass, as long as I can see through it, lay it on top, and I take a glass cutter, and I actually just cut directly off the pattern without having to cut pieces out and tracing them. And so that can speed the process up a lot. If you have a light table underneath it, it's even better, and we'll talk about light tables another time. Get this stuff out of the way. But what I tend to use mostly is Homosoap board. The Homosoap board is recycled paper that's been compressed together. It's about a 1/2 inch thick, pretty firm. It's got a flame retardant in it, so you can solder on it, not worrying about going or bursting into flames. You can take push pins. You can push them down inside to hold stuff together. And so it's pretty handy for a lot of things. What I do is I have a straight edge over here It could be wood or it could be metal. In my case, I used 1 inch by 2 inch rectangular tubing, and I screwed up, I laid it on my plywood. Let's get a piece of plywood here on the edge. And I drilled holes and screwed up from the bottom side so my top stayed nice and smooth. And now I have this nice straight edge I can use, and in the other videos we'll talk about that a lot more. So this is kind of my preference. It's generally available, it's also called sound barrier board, in your big box stores like Home Depot, Menards. If they do not carry it, use the backside of a ceiling tile, because it also will accept push pins, or a piece of drywall or sheetrock. The only problem with those two options is the edges can get a little crumbly, so you might want to take a piece of tape around the edges just to keep it contained. Alright, that's work surface. Big thing is firm and smooth. If you start getting glass shards, sweep them off out of the way so that we don't break the glass because something pushing up from underneath. Let's talk a little bit about glass cutters. This is your cheap $5 to $10 hardware store special. It's just got a simple steel wheel in it that's good for maybe a half dozen cuts before it's dull. Then it's about worthless. And so I say, don't waste your time. And I'm buying one. And somebody said, wait a minute, John. Look at that nice round ball on there. That's good for tapping. Well, when it comes to tapping, just say no. When I started off in stained glass back in the early 80s, tapping was one of the things I taught. It sounded cool. We'll just make a little line here. We'll score it out. And what it does is it causes your score line, because glass cutting is a two-part. There is no erase when we cut glass. We create a score line which breaks the surface tension of the glass. And then we take and we cause a crack to run along that score line. So we got it here. And the idea is you take and you just come up underneath and tap on it. And it runs a score, cause it separate. The problem is that I was doing that, if you noticed, I couldn't stay perfectly centered in the score line. And so now I got little chips here and there. It's not a really nice smooth edge. And the other methods I'll show you in the next video will take care of a lot of that problem. And the other thing it does, it sends what's called microfractures sideways, not just on the score line, but sideways also. And what those microfractures do is they create the opportunity for thermal expansion contraction cracking. If you're soldering your piece of glass, you'll hear the people say, well, don't stay in one place too long, or don't pick up solder balls because you're staying in place too long, you're going to crack your glass. Well, maybe you're soldering long, you haven't stayed in place one too long, but it cracks anyway. You say, why did that happen? It's because of the thermal expansion contraction in those microfractures. They give it the opportunity to grow. And a good illustration would be a windshield. You're driving down the road and the rock hits it and you get a chip in your windshield. And if you don't get that fixed right away, you might come out in the morning and look at that, and now you got a small crack coming out from it, from the microfractures that go out radiating around the side. And over the next few weeks, that crack slowly grows as it heats and cools. And so the same thing can happen. Maybe you got that project finished. It looks beautiful. Man, you're proud of that. You take and you wrap it with bubble wrap. You've got cardboard or styrofoam on the sides to help stiffen it up some. You set it in a box surrounded with peanuts. Got it sealed up. You put it in the back seat of your car, standing up vertically between your seats, so it's strong, because that's how glass is strongest, is being vertical. You get there, you open it up, and there's a cracked piece in it. How did that happen? The little micro vibrations as you're going down the road can transmit through the styrofoam and stuff, and those micro vibrations, and it can cause it to crack. You say, well, that doesn't sound very realistic. And it probably didn't happen a lot, but it does happen from time to time. The other thing is, you get there, you hand them this nice, perfect looking piece, they hang it in the window, and then maybe 3 or 4 weeks down the road, they look, and it's got a crack piece in it. They say, how'd that happen? It didn't fall down. Nobody threw anything against it. It's just hanging there. And again, it's from that micro fracture that has been expanding and contracting due to heat changes that created that crack. And so a lot of people are resistant to saying tapping is bad. Well, I've never had any problem with it. Again, a lot of times it's because it happens while it's hanging in somebody's home, and they're not going to turn around and say, well, John, that piece you did for me, it cracked. It's all your fault. Because they've already had it for a few weeks. So they're not going to turn around and blame me. When in reaction, if I've been tapping, it could have very well been my fault. So rather than take the risk, I just say when it comes to tapping, no. I'll show you lots of other options in the next video that'll take care of what tapping supposedly did. Alright, these are all Toyo cutters right here. I think Toyo makes one of the best lines of cutters, Toyo. You have two options. You got dry cutters and you got oil reservoir cutters. Any of them can be used for dry cutting. Any of them can be used for oil, depending on how you use it. This one just does not have an oil reservoir. But you can turn around and you can dip, and we'll talk about that next. The way this works is the reservoir here is supposed to be able to keep from leaking. It's got a plug in the end. The plug's got a flat spot on the threads, and it's got an O-ring. So when it's screwed in snug, it's supposed to create a vacuum here where the oil cannot leak out. And then you open up a quarter turn, and then air can enter along these flat spot in the threads, allowing the oil to come out. So that sounds great in theory. And to go along with that, if you push on the cutter head, it pushes a rod which opens a little valve that is sitting against the tube, and that allows oil to come through. And then when it comes out, it closes the valve off to try to keep from dripping out when you don't want it to. The oil that comes down the tube, it hits a cotton wick that comes up against the scoring wheel, so it oils the wheel of the shaft, and the little wick helps catch glass shards to clean your glass cutter. But the problem is, the seal, after going back and forth numerous times, it starts deteriorating and it starts leaking. The O-ring starts having problems. So now all of a sudden your glass cutter starts leaking. And so rather than fight that issue, a majority of the stained glass artists will do what's called dipping. They'll take the thing similar to this, a jar lid. This one has a little rubber mat on it. It's got a little more weight to it. And they'll just take their glass cutter, and that oils it. It helps clean the glass shards off. The problem with this one here is, unless there's something to help keep it from sliding, it's not heavy enough to do any good. But you can take a couple push pins and stick it in and rest against that, and you can use it that way. So that's a good option. And then people say, okay, John, what type of oil can I use? I've heard people say they use baby oil, 3-in-1 oil, WD-40, lamp oil. What do you recommend? And what I recommend is getting an oil designed for glass cutters. It doesn't have to be the Novocaine. There's other brands out there. But even though it says it's oil-based, they're still designed to be water-soluble, which means that most of the oil will wash off while you're grinding. You don't have to take soap and water and scrub them down like you would with the other options before you can foil. So that speeds up the process a lot. And so stick to something that's designed for cutter's oil. It doesn't take a whole lot. Now, your glass cutters come with a little dropper or pipette like this. And so you can dip it in there, get some oil here, squeeze it out. But now you got an oil slimy thing here, what are you going to do with this? You got to figure out a way to store it. Rather than do that, I'll take and go to the craft store and buy bottles. Sometimes they're 2 or 3 in a set. Not very expensive. It's got a dropper built in. So now you can turn around and wet it down, put it inside, close it off. It's all contained, no mess. I'm done. It simplifies things instead of trying to mess with this option here. So I'd encourage you to get eyedropper bottles. They're not very expensive. And do it different. When I get a brand new glass cutter, I will go ahead and I'll put, maybe a ½ inch or so oil in the reservoir, 1 dipper worth. And that helps prime the wick to where it starts working right away. And then after that, as the oil works its way out, I'm busy just dipping as I go. You don't have to do it after every cut. It's every few cuts. But it does work a lot better. And so, do it. Now, we mentioned this is a dry cutter. When would you want a dry cut? When you're fusing is one of the prime times. And what happens, I'll set to the side, is when you're fusing and your glass goes together, you want it to be a nice, smooth, no seams. But if you have a little bit of oil residue on the edges of your glass, as they fuse together, that residue burns and raises to the top, and now you might have a seam instead of a nice, smooth surface. And so to prevent that risk of happening, if you dry cut, is not an issue. Again, you can use these as dry cutters. Just mark it so you know that you haven't been using oil with it to keep it safe. This is called a barrel cutter. Some people call it a pencil cutter because you can hold it like a pencil. Different people hold it differently. You can also put your finger over top and use it this way. Whatever is most comfortable for you. They work well, but there are potentially better options for those that have arthritic or grip challenges. These are called modified barrel cutters. They have some form of a saddle or pommel, and what it does is it rests here against the web of your hand, and you curl your fingers around the cutter. Originally, this particular one here, the Super Cutter or Custom Grip, had a narrow pommel, and then they shortly later changed it to a wider, a little bit more comfortable fitting. And you notice I can wrap my fingers around it, and the pressure's here, not out here. All this does is guide it. And so it takes a lot of pressure and trouble out of your hands if you have grip problems. This one here does the same thing. This is called a Thomas grip. And you just wrap your hand around it. This one's just a little bit on the small side for my hand. If you look at them, there's not a whole lot of difference from here to here. But that 1/4 inch can make a big difference on how it fits and how comfortable you feel. So this one is a fixed length. You can't adjust it, but it works well. This one here, because the pommel is offset, if you start off in this direction here, and it's got a spacer on this side here, that makes it the shortest length it can have here. Then we take the spacer, move it to the other side, that makes it just a little bit longer. Then we take the pommel and flip it over, and leave the spacer here, makes it a little longer still. Then we move the spacer down here, and put it over here, it makes it longer still. So you have 4 different options to help custom fit your hand. And again, it's just pretty comfortable to work with. If by chance you're over pressing and you happen to break this part, the pommels are replaceable. Now, another option you have is a pistol grip cutter. It also is good if you have arthritic challenges. And you can put your thumb on the side and put it on top, whatever fits your hand well. In some of the videos you might see me, I'll pick up my Morton runner. I'm using that for breaking glass. And I'll just hold on to it while I'm cutting. So it tells you I don't have to have a real tight grip here to score. Now these two types of cutters here have what's called tap wheel technology. Normally it has a little sticker when you first get it. It'll say tap wheel technology. Some of the older ones that might be in store that are still new didn't have tap wheel technology. And so to tell whether it has tap wheel technology, you look at the side of the cutter head. And all the toil cutter heads will start off with a TC number. That means toil cutter. And there's a different number for each type of handle. And even with this pistol grip, they had a couple different styles for the cutter heads. But this is a TC 600, and above the 600 is a V for vibrate, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. This one says TC 21V, against vibrate. If it does not have the V, it does not have tap wheel technology. We'll set those to the side. Tap wheel technology is the inside of the scoring wheel has a gear-like protrusion, so as it rolls around, it does a real small vibration up and down. That allows your score line to go deeper into the glass without sending microfiber or fracture sideways. And this came out in 1998. And every once in a while you get a piece of glass that's just a real challenge to cut. Having a cutter with tap wheel technology can make a lot of difference on those. So, in my opinion, again, it's my opinion, you can't do any better than either a pistol grip with tap wheel technology or the modified barrel super cutter custom grip with tap wheel technology. And that's it for the cutting surfaces and glass cutters. Next video, we'll start on cutting glass. Thank you for watching.